There was a point in New York City from about the early 1930s to the late 1950s where just about everyone was in on the same inside joke. It was a bit of slang when you'd say something like, "I pulled a crater," or "you're pulling a crater." It means you vanished. Today we'd swap out crater with something like the term ghosted. As in, you met someone on Tinder, didn't think much about them, and you ghosted, you vanished, no trace, no way to get in touch, you were gone, pulling a crater. Only thing about that, crater isn't just a slang term, he was a well-known man. Judge Joseph Crater. By 1930, he had it all, a seat on the New York State Supreme Court, a position of power, of influence and importance. Until that night, August 3rd, 1930. Judge Crater went to dinner with friends and walked out into the unknown, never heard from again. A disappearance resulting in one of the largest investigations in the city, really in the country at the time. So much so, it earned Crater the title of Missingest Man in New York. He vanished. A ghost. I'm Dan Bowens, and you are listening to The Tape Room, a podcast on the Fox 5 Podcast Network. Here, we take a look back at some of the tri-state area's unsolved and infamous crimes. On this episode, The Missingest Man in New York, the curious case of Judge Crater. At one point, it was the most famous cold case in the country, and certainly in New York. This is 1930, the year after the height of the Great Depression. The stock market crashed. Things are bad. 25% of the country is unemployed. Crime is awful. These are mob days, what the media at the time called Murder Incorporated. Corruption is rampant. Judge Crater was appointed by then New York State Governor Franklin Roosevelt. Yes, FDR, the iconic president. Crater was selected over a choice from the powerful and corrupt Tammany Hall wing of New York City politics. As the story goes, Crater may have himself paid off the Tammany political machine to make it happen. Some believe Crater vanished because he needed to leave town, left his family and moved away without a trace to escape danger. Others believe he died inside his favorite brothel, and the head madam, who had an in with the local mob boss, may have called to get rid of his body. And still others think his final resting place is literally with the fishes, buried beneath what is now the Brooklyn Aquarium out on Coney Island in Brooklyn. It's this final theory that we're exploring today, and the letter that piqued the interest of the NYPD about this possibility way back in 2005. Our conversation now with veteran New York Post crime reporter Larry Celona.
Hello?
Hey Larry, sorry about that. Dan Bowens?
How you doing?
I'm doing great. So Larry, the first thing, Larry, can you just say your first and your last name, where you work, and what kind of stuff you typically write about?
Okay, my name is Larry Celona. I'm a police reporter for the New York Post. I've been for the last 26 years and cover all major crimes that happen in and around New York City.
And this case that we're talking about, do you remember how this came across your desk? Did you receive contact from Barbara? Do you remember how this one came across your desk?
I received, a tip from a police source that I had who told me that the Cold Case Squad, had started working on this case.
And it turns out that this case, I don't know how familiar with it you were beforehand, but this case is one of, or if not the oldest missing persons case in New York City history.
I was familiar with the phrase Judge Crater being missing. I didn't realize it was the oldest case at the time, but I found that out subsequently. But I was familiar, again, with the old phrase or the joke, Judge Crater missing, somebody going missing or whatever, disappearing.
And what do we know about the basics of who Judge Crater was? I mean, we're talking about the 1920s. We're talking about the old sort of machine of politics back in the history of the city. What do we know about who Judge Crater was?
Yeah, he was a character during the Roaring Twenties. He was actually appointed to the Supreme Court by then Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who later became obviously president. But and he was a man about town. He lived on Fifth Avenue. He had a wife, and whatever his. He had a summer home where he vacationed up in Maine. So he was living, pretty high on the hog for the 1920s.
He was a big fish in the city.
He was a big fish. He hung out in all these places. He dressed. He was a dapper dresser. He's well dressed. Even I think the last time he was seen, he was in a pinstripe suit and wearing a Panama hat. Spats. Yeah, he was what they would call back then a bon vivant or whatever. But he was. Yeah, he was definitely a man about town.
And he was an actual judge, though, right? I mean, he was a judge who was involved in...
He was a judge. He was a judge in the state Supreme Court, yeah.
And all of a sudden, he is known for some of the things that you talked about, maybe affiliation with showgirls, and he's sort of linked to the Tammany Hall machine of government way back then. And one night, he vanishes.
Yes, he was at a well-known, they called it, chop house back then, but I guess we call it a steakhouse now today, over on West 45th Street. He's with a couple of friends. He tells them he was going to go to the theater, and he jumps in a cab, and he's never seen or heard from again.
And that wasn't something that went unnoticed. I mean, he's a big-time sort of person involved in all different kinds of the happenings in the city at the time. What sort of happens then? I mean, there's a big police investigation. I mean, what do we know about sort of what happened in the aftermath of that?
Well, there was a police investigation, and you laugh now. You say that back then they offered a $5,000 reward, but $5,000 was a lot of money in 1930. So they had put that out. And I think at the time, or I read somewhere, I didn't know this, that detectives received more than 16,000 tips from around the world, not even the city or the United States, from all over the world on some kind of tips where he was or what happened. And I don't know if detectives looked into all 16,000, but that was a lot of tips.
And by 1939, I mean, he's never found. They have declared him dead. In the article you wrote, I mean, it turns out he's missing persons file number 13595. But that's a number. But then he sort of weaves his way into pop culture just because of the way people referred to him. I mean, it was how did they refer to him?
Well, I mean, some of the things that they said was like if somebody would have disappeared, he pulled a crate, or somebody just disappeared one day, or I think he even showed up in a couple of. There was a TV show, Dick Van Dyke, where they made a reference to him. So he just became a man, and that was referred to, in various ways. There's like a punchline. I think Mad Magazine did a cartoon about him with Lassie, finding the judge, digging him up. People sometimes would make a joke and say, Judge Crater, call your office. And Dick Van Dyke, they made a reference that it was a Judge Crater, but then the person made a reference that he spelled it differently. So there was various references throughout.
Over time, yeah. So if you pulled a crater, you'd vanished without a trace.
Yes, he just disappeared. He was sort of like the before Jimmy Hoffa. He was the famous person who disappeared and never heard from again.
And do we know? I mean, he was sort of at the fringes of corruption, right? I mean, there may have been a reason why he would have vanished, as opposed to just.
Well, there were a lot of theories back in the day that he was involved. Like I said, that he ran off with a showgirl, that he he was involved with Tammany Hall, which was so corrupt, and they were afraid that he might have testified against them. There's other stories that, he owed somebody money. There's talk that a famous gangster back then was Leg Simon, that he might have been involved in his death. There's places that he might have been killed up in Albany. There's a lot of theories, as in like any well-known murder, but like just most recently, last week we had a market, in Staten Island 2 weeks ago, and there were a lot of theories before they made the actual arrest. It turned out none of those theories were true.
100%. Yeah, you're talking about the head of the Gambino crime family, who was
Frank Cali, and there was all theories before they finally made the arrest 2 days later.
Yep.
So you imagine, and that was 2 days later they made an arrest. So imagine like they haven't made an arrest in over 80 years. So imagine the theories going around about that. So no one talks about Judge Craig today.
And by 79, the case is officially closed, officially declared dead. I guess he was declared dead in 39, but the case officially closed in 79. But then in the early 2000s, 2005, there's this mysterious letter that sort of comes across the desk of some NYPD detectives. What do we know about that?
Well, yes. So what happens was in 2005, a 91-year-old woman from Queens, leaves behind a note basically saying that her husband and two other people were responsible for the death of Judge Prater. And I guess her family opened up the letter and they saw that they had to do a little research to find out who Judge Prater was and all, and then I guess they forwarded it to the police. And then the police, started to look into it.
And the letter says, "Do not open until my death." This old lady, and in the letter, the woman claims that it was her late husband who was responsible.
Yeah, she said that her husband and two other people, one a former cop and the cop's brother, who was a cab driver, were responsible for Judge Prater's death.
And what did they say? What does she claim happened?
She said that he was killed and he was buried in Coney Island under the boardwalk near the aquarium. And the thing that makes it even a little more suspect is that the cop that is mentioned was also mentioned in another infamous New York case where Murder Incorporated Abe Kid Twisterellis was, he died allegedly from committing suicide, but this officer, Charles Burns, he was assigned to bodyguard him. So people always suspect about that, how he was able to, commit suicide. So Burns had a checkered history in the police department already before this mention.
So here we have one of the most infamous cases, crimes in the history of New York City, a letter that's mysterious, and a claim that is very, New York corruption central, that someone is buried beneath the Coney Island aquarium. I mean, I imagine that cops and detectives get all kinds of crazy theories, but apparently they took this one pretty seriously.
Well, they took it seriously. I mean, ironically, but I think they had done it when they were building the aquarium. They had found some remains of bodies there, not even knowing anything about the Judge Prater theory. Mentioned that he was buried there. That was back in the 50s when they were building it. So they did it. They then tried, I think, to do some kind of DNA match, but nothing resulted. They did not get a match resulting, but it might have been because the remains were not properly cared for back in the 50s. That was before anybody even ever heard of DNA. So, and I don't know what kind of DNA they were able to get from like anybody in Judge Crater's family to even make a proper a match.
And so the police, they try to run down whatever leads they can, and it looks like maybe they even had a plan to dig up a couple certain areas. I mean, they made some plans and never really amounted to anything.
Yeah, no, they never really went forward with that. I mean, like I said, they had to remain. I don't even know if they kept those remains from the 50s. So, but they had already had some. But they did not dig. They did not redig. They did not redig it, and I really can't tell you the reason why they didn't redig or go forward with that.
So then here we have it, a mystery that's sort of still a mystery, and I mean, who knows what's down there beneath that aquarium.
Yes, that's true. But like I said, the thing is, they did find bodies before, so if there was like any chance of being a connection to Judge Crater, it might have been in those initial bodies found, but they weren't properly cared for or investigated at the time.
I guess New York City, so many layers of history. You start digging up anywhere in New York City, you never know what the hell you're going to find.
Yeah. You can just go down about 10, 20 feet, probably on any block throughout New York, and you might find something.
Larry, anything else you want to say? I mean, this was great. You're super knowledgeable on the case. But anything else you wanted to say about it?
No, it's just it's real. Old New York history. People today wouldn't even. You'd have to research it. I guess now they would Google it, and then they would find a lot of history. But like I said, New York is so full of history. People don't realize like what went on back then in the 20s. People talk about corruption today, and this is like nothing compared to how business ran back then. So they would really get a real education if they wanted to, looking back then.
The case, of course, remains unsolved, literally one of the oldest cold cases in the city of New York. I want to make one final note here. This story actually was brought to our attention by a person who'd listened to one of our podcasts. This person sent me a message on my Facebook page, which is @DanBowensTV on Facebook. And I was very appreciative because she'd listened to the podcast and she had a very close relationship with this story. She was actually the granddaughter of the woman who had that letter. And so it's this kind of feedback that we really appreciate here at the Tape Room. Someone who listened, who knew that we would take a closer look and offered us some insight into a case that they were familiar with. And so for everyone else who has reached out to us, we hear you. We're working on some of these other cases, and we hope to bring more of them to you very soon. The Tape Room is part of the Fox 5 Podcast Network. I'm your host, Dan Bowens. This episode was recorded, edited, and mixed by Matt Onimus. Our executive producers are myself, Matt Onimus, and Ahmad Asghar. Byron Harmon is Vice President of Fox 5 News, and Lou Leone is Vice President and General Manager. If you have any information regarding this crime, you are encouraged to call Crime Stoppers, 1-800-577-TIPS, 1-800-577-TIPS. Stay tuned for the next episode of The Tape Room.